Yarik Kessler lay on the biobed, shirt off, the overhead lights of the galactic medical observation deck casting a stark white glow over his torso. A long, pale scar curved along the lower right side of his abdomen, like a crescent moon half buried in flesh. It caught the attention of the intern assigned to him within seconds of his arrival, an alien named Vetriv, a species known as the Kelnari. Taller than most humans, Vetriv had slender limbs and smooth, glassy skin the color of green ash. His eyes, large and unblinking, tracked the scar with such intensity that Yarik raised an eyebrow. "You're staring," Yarik said, voice flat. "Is that part of your bedside manner?" Vetriv didn't look away. "You have a laceration that healed incorrectly. The scar tissue is uneven." "What caused this?" Yarik exhaled through his nose. "Soccer, college game, I was a forward. Defender's cleats caught me bad during a slide tackle." Vetriv blinked once. "You played a sport where sharpened foot extensions are permitted." "They weren't sharpened," Yarik muttered. "Just metal." "Standard cleats." Vetriv turned to the supervising physician, a round-bodied, slow-moving being named Dura, and spoke in a rapid series of vibrating syllables that Yarik couldn't follow. Dura grunted. Vetriv turned back. "You continued playing after the injury?" "No, I collapsed." "Got taken to the ER, surgery. Took about 6 months before I could sprint again." Vetriv's head tilted. "Why engage in such trauma-inducing activities voluntarily?" Yarik sighed, sat up slowly, and swung his legs off the biobed. "Because it mattered." "You ever done something that hurt like hell but made you feel alive?" "I am not designed to engage in pain-seeking behavior." Yarik chuckled. "Well, that's probably for the best." The door to the observation room hissed open, and Dura's assistant, a lean, jittery alien named Vetriv, motioned for Yarik to follow. "Testing chamber. Now, sudden drop in arterial pressure overnight. We need to rule out internal bleeding." Yarik stood, ignoring the stiffness in his side. "Great, more scanners." The testing chamber was colder. Yarik lay flat again while Vetriv hovered nearby, eyes still drifting back to the scar. "You've seen worse, right?" Yarik asked. "I have seen open wounds and necrotic tissue," Vetriv said, "but none that were so old yet still clearly influential. You favor your left side when you walk." Yarik frowned. "You notice that from 10 steps, I observe." The scanner panels hummed as they moved over Yarik's body. A low whirring sound preceded each pulse of light. Vetriv monitored the data feed. "No internal bleeding," he said after a moment. "But your scar pulls at surrounding muscle tissue. This may explain the pressure shifts." Yarik stretched his arms above his head. "Doc back home said it'd always do that, said I'd get used to it. You adjusted your biomechanics, learned to run with the pain. Eventually, I stopped noticing." Vetriv looked at him for a long moment. "That is not normal. Welcome to humanity." 2 days later, Yarik was cleared for light activity. He joined a small mixed-species crew on a maintenance mission aboard Station Coral 8, orbiting a dead moon near the edge of the Trisari system. The job was simple: replace a faulty air filtration core in the station's lower tubes. Vetriv, still shadowing him as part of his internship, accompanied the mission. The access shaft was narrow, forcing Yarik to twist sideways to fit. The scar tugged again as he moved, a dull reminder of old trauma. "Are you in pain?" Vetriv asked. "Not pain, just tension." They reached the filter module, charred and fused to the wall. Yarik grunted as he pulled a heavy diagnostic panel forward. The movement wrenched his side. "All right," he muttered, breathing through clenched teeth. "That one hurt. You should stop," Vetriv said. "Not an option. We finish the job, then we go." He worked slowly, carefully, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold air. After nearly an hour, the filter was replaced and sealed. But as they began the return crawl, the shaft trembled. A deep vibration rolled through the metal. "What was that?" Yarik asked. Vetriv pressed his communicator. "Station control report. We felt before the sentence finished, the shaft jolted." Yarik was thrown sideways, his ribs slamming into the curved wall. He gasped. the impact slicing a fresh bolt of pain through his abdomen. Everything went dark for a moment. When he opened his eyes, Vetriv was beside him, scanning his torso with a handheld device. 2 ribs fractured. Internal bruising, we must exit immediately. Give me a second, Yarik groaned. Need to breathe. He tried sitting up. Pain rippled across his chest. He stopped. I need assistance, Vetriv said into his calm. We have a human in distress. Structural instability in shaft 7. The shaft groaned again, a low, metallic warning. Not waiting, Yarik said through clenched teeth. Help me up. You should not move. If we wait, we'll both be crushed. Vetriv hesitated, then looped one arm under Yarik's shoulder. Together, they crawled, inch by inch. Yarik's breathing was ragged, each motion sending fresh pain into his chest. By the time they reached the access hatch, backup had arrived, 2 lanky Sarathi engineers pulling them through and onto a stable corridor. Yarik collapsed back against the wall, eyes closed. You are reckless, Vetriv said. You risked further damage. Yarik didn't answer, just focused on breathing back on the medical deck. Dura ran scans. 2 broken ribs, hematoma forming near the old scar tissue. You'll be grounded for 2 weeks. No exceptions. Wasn't planning on sprinting, Yarik said, voice hoarse. Vetriv stood nearby, arms folded. This is the second time your scar has interfered with routine function. Why has it not been repaired? It was, sort of, we're not machines. We heal, but not perfectly. He shifted uncomfortably as the biogel was applied to his side. It burned slightly, then numbed. Vetriv turned away, silently processing. That night, Vetriv requested access to Yarik's old medical files. The human's records were thorough surgery notes, rehab logs, even footage of the match where the injury occurred. Vetriv watched the moment frame by frame, Yarik sprinting, ball at his feet, the defender's slide, the collision, the fall. Then the convulsing pain as medics rushed in. He watched it twice. The following morning, Vetriv approached Yarik, who sat in the observation lounge, ribs bound, sipping something warm. I viewed the footage, Vetriv said. Of the injury? Yes, you screamed, then tried to stand. Yarik nodded slowly. I remember. Didn't want to be carried off. Why? Pride, stubbornness, maybe stupidity. Vetriv sat across from him. You risked permanent damage, I know. And you believe that was worth it. Yarik looked out at the stars beyond the window. I was 19, that game was everything. We were in the finals, I thought. If I could just stand, maybe I could keep playing. Vetriv was silent for a moment. Do you regret it? Yarik touched his side lightly. No, I hate the scar, but I don't regret the moment. Vetriv leaned back, his gaze still fixed on the human. You willingly engaged in high-impact activities, sustained a severe injury, underwent surgery, adjusted your biomechanics, then risked further trauma to save both yourself and me. Yarik gave a tired smile. Yeah. That about sums it up. I will never understand your species. You're not the first to say that. Vetriv looked down at his datapad, then slowly closed it. But I'm beginning to see why the senior researchers call you adaptive anomalies. Not sure if that's a compliment. It is not meant to be, but it is. Accurate. Yarik leaned back, wincing slightly. I'll take it. The pain remained. The recovery would be slow. But for the first time since arriving on the station, Yarik felt seen not as a curiosity, not as a reckless fool, but as something else entirely. A scarred survivor, shaped by choice and consequence. Vetriv stood. I will monitor your recovery personally. I believe there is more to learn. Yarik raised his cup in mock salute. Welcome to the human condition. 3 days after the shaft collapse, Yarik was back on his feet, walking slow laps around the station's botanical ring. The artificial gravity was slightly lighter than Earth's, giving his fractured ribs a minor reprieve. Still, every turn of his torso sent a twinge through his side, a reminder of how much cartilage and bone hated sudden movement. Vetriv hovered nearby, hands folded behind his back, watching in that silently calculating way that made Yarik feel like a lab specimen. The botanical ring was mostly empty. save for a few Thenorians tending to the nutrient foggers near the ceiling. Pale green mist drifted over rows of engineered plants, vines coiled around transparent trellises like curious snakes. You could walk more naturally if you adjusted your posture, Vetriv said, not for the first time. I could also lie down and soak in a tank of medical jelly for a week, Yarik replied, but they won't let me do that either. You lean too far forward, it compresses your thoracic cavity. I'm trying not to bust open again, thanks. Vetriv fell silent, head tilted just slightly. Yarik had learned that meant he was running calculations or silently judging something, possibly both. They walked another 15 meters in silence before Vetriv spoke again. Your tissues are regenerating slower than projected. Not surprised, I haven't exactly been resting. You have not. You left the medbay 12 hours after being told to remain there. I'm not good at lying around, makes me twitchy. Vetriv's eyes narrowed. Your physiological priorities are inefficient. Yarik stopped walking. You know what's inefficient? Laying still while a bunch of pipes are vibrating over your head. I moved because waiting meant we'd both get turned into paste. You made that decision in 6 seconds. Yeah, and it was the right call. Vetriv didn't respond. He turned away and studied the plants climbing up the wall. One of the Thenorians misted a row of blue-leafed stalks, which hissed softly in response. The intern watched with quiet focus before turning back. There is a request from Station Command, he said. They want you to speak at the Interspecies Resilience Symposium next cycle. Yarik squinted. Why? You demonstrated sufficient adaptability under stress. They wish to examine your decision-making process. What like a case study? They are calling it a living profile in real-time cognitive deviation. Sounds flattering. They offered a meal voucher. Yarik rubbed a hand over his face. Fine. When is it? 4 solar rotations from now. Plenty of time to rehearse being inspirational. Vetriv blinked. They are not expecting inspiration. They are expecting data. Then they're in for a weird surprise. Later that rotation, just past second rest phase, Yarik was called to the auxiliary med lab on level 9. He arrived to find Vetriv already inside, standing beside a large translucent tank filled with pale blue suspension gel. Suspended in the gel, half-formed, was a synthetic replica of a human torso, ribs, muscle layers, partial skin scaffolding, all suspended in various stages of growth. What is that? Yarik asked. A simulation of your lower thoracic structure as it will be in 42 hours, Vetriv said. With your permission, I've been compiling regeneration metrics from your scans. I didn't give permission. You didn't refuse. That's not how permission works. Vetriv gestured toward the tank. The scar tissue is still altering the muscle behavior. It is not healing evenly. There is a risk of recurring strain if you return to physical activity too soon. I already knew that. There is also opportunity. Yarik folded his arms slowly. Opportunity for what? To study how your body compensates. It is rerouting stress along non-standard muscular chains. Your diaphragm is slightly higher than normal. Your left intercostals are thickening. That's not a good thing. It is not traditional, but it is functional. Your body is adapting to its own internal deviation. Yarik stared at the floating reconstruction. The scar had been mapped in careful, almost reverent detail. He didn't know whether to feel violated or impressed. So you're making a fake chest to watch my ribs work? Yes. And what do you plan to do with it? Subject it to controlled strain and observe compensatory reactions. I have already submitted the proposal, without telling me. I assumed you would be interested. Yarik stepped closer to the tank. Can I ask you something, within reason? Why are you so focused on this? It's just a scar, a bad one sure, but it's not rare. It is not the scar. It is the system sustaining it. Your physiology should have failed in several areas. Instead, it restructured. Poorly but effectively. Thanks for the compliment. I do not offer compliments, I offer observations. Yarik pressed his palm lightly against the tank's surface. The synthetic muscle inside twitched faintly as if reacting to his presence. It was eerie, watching a piece of his own body reconstructed in sterile suspension. "You ever get injured?" he asked. "No, ever broken anything? My species does not possess internal bones." "Of course you don't." Vetriv watched Yarik closely. "Have you considered allowing surgical correction?" "Not really. There are techniques now that could dissolve the scar and restructure the tissue with minimal risk." "I earned it. I'm not removing it just because it's inconvenient." Vetriv's brow furrowed. "That is not logical." "No," Yarik said, turning away from the tank. "It's not." At midday the next cycle, Yarik was seated in a small amphitheater aboard the central dome. The symposium had begun with a lecture from a Mitrathi linguist on tonal stress under duress, followed by a presentation from a silicon-based lifeform who had survived the collapse of their homeworld's crust. Yarik had been slotted last, likely because no one was sure what he was going to say. He stepped onto the stage to scattered applause, mostly polite, a few claps from the human delegation near the back. Vetriv sat near the front, datapad in hand. Yarik cleared his throat. "So I'm not a scientist," he began. "I'm not a soldier or a pilot or a diplomat. I came here to help fix air filters and maybe learn something new. Instead, I broke a couple ribs and got turned into a medical curiosity." A few scattered chuckles. "I've been asked to talk about resilience, which is funny because there's no manual for how humans do it. It's not something we plan, we just adjust." More silence than laughter now. The room had gone still. "I took a bad hit once. Years ago, scarred me up. Changed how I moved, how I ran, how I breathed. I didn't like it, but I didn't stop. I kept going. Not because I thought it made me stronger, but because there wasn't another option. We don't shut down when things break. We keep moving even if it hurts." He paused. The silence stretched. "That's it. That's the speech. We adapt because stopping isn't part of the design." He stepped away from the lectern. Polite applause followed. Vetriv didn't clap, but his eyes were fixed on Yarik with an unreadable expression. Back in the botanical wing that night, Yarik sat beneath a tall biolume tree whose leaves glowed faint orange under low light. Vetriv approached without speaking, holding a narrow flask of something that steamed faintly. "You didn't mention the scar," he said, sitting beside him. "I didn't think it needed to be the whole story. It is the origin of the deviation, maybe, but it's not who I am." They sat in silence while the leaves rustled above them, stirred by the station's recycled air. Vetriv finally held out the flask. "Herbal solution, reduces tissue inflammation. Tastes like oxidized copper." Yarik took it, sipped, gagged, and coughed once. "You weren't kidding." "I never do." The human leaned back against the bench, eyes half-lidded. "You're really not going to let this scar thing go, are you?" "No, all right. The next time you want to build a fake version of my chest, at least let me name it." Vetriv's head tilted. "What would you name it, Larry?" A long pause. "I will update the registry," Vetriv said. 2 weeks passed. Yarik's ribs healed with the frustrating slowness typical of human biology, but the pain had dulled into something manageable. The station's medical board finally cleared him for unrestricted movement, though they added a note suggesting he exercise moderation in torsional exertion, which he promptly ignored. Vetriv didn't mention the simulated torso again. The tank had been drained and dismantled a few days after the symposium, its bio-scaffolding recycled into lab protein. Yarik never asked what had become of the data, and Vetriv never volunteered it. That silence suited them both. On the 6th orbital cycle after the incident, Yarik was assigned to a repair crew headed to the outer node, a spindly array of solar collectors that extended from the station like a skeletal arm. The job was basic: recalibrate the angle servos on 3 of the collectors, which had drifted out of alignment during a recent power surge. Nothing glamorous. Just a couple hours in a pressure suit, tethered to a kilometer-long walkway with the vacuum of space humming politely on the other side of his helmet. Vetriv joined uninvited. "You're not on the crew manifest," Yarik said as they suited up in the prep chamber. "I filed an auxiliary observation request. When, 4 hours ago, it was approved, I have the clearance code." Yarik tightened a seal on his suit collar. "You just really enjoy watching me climb around in dangerous places, don't you? I require additional context for your recovery assessment." "Right, because reading a chart isn't enough. You are not a chart." They stepped into the airlock. The chamber cycled with a low groan, and a moment later, the outer hatch rose away, revealing the black stretch of space and the glittering curve of the solar array. Yarik clipped his tether to the guide rail and stepped forward. The walkway beneath his boots was a narrow mesh spine, just wide enough for 1 foot at a time. He moved with practiced care, feeling the slight give of the tether with each step. Vetriv followed, his movements more cautious, though surprisingly steady for someone without bones. The first servo housing was 20 meters out, encased in a panel the size of a small coffin. Yarik unlatched it, exposing the scorched actuator inside. "Looks like it took a direct surge," he said. "Heat shieldings bubbled." Vetriv floated half a meter off the walkway, watching. "Can you repair it without full replacement? Maybe, if the motor's not fused." He removed a small tool from his belt and began unscrewing the mount. The panel resisted, then came loose with a metallic pop. As he leaned forward to expose more of the interior, his torso twisted and he froze. Vetriv noticed immediately. "What is wrong?" "Nothing. You stopped moving." "Because I'm thinking, you are clenching your jaw." "Because I'm concentrating." Vetriv drifted closer. "You experienced pain." Yarik kept his eyes on the servo. "It's not a problem. Your scar pulled against the intercostal muscle. I can see the shift in your breathing." "I said it's not a problem. You are compensating again." "Then let me compensate." He continued working, jaw tight. The tool buzzed against the casing as he pried out the actuator. The heat damage was worse than he'd hoped, but not catastrophic. He swapped in a fresh component from his pack and reassembled the housing. "Done," he said. "2 more." They moved along the spine, the station's structure humming faintly underfoot. The second unit required only recalibration, which Yarik completed without issue. No sharp twists. No pain. Vetriv remained silent throughout, hovering just behind his shoulder. At the third collector, however, they found more than mechanical failure. The panel was half open, its lock visibly forced. The servo casing had been removed entirely, replaced by a crude bypass loop. Wires twisted together with what looked like melted insulation foam. Yarik stared. "This wasn't a surge," he said. "This was sabotage." Vetriv scanned the area. No work order was filed for this modification. No one did this by accident. They rerouted power from the actuator into the auxiliary line. That feeds the long-range relay. Why would someone divert power there? Only reason I can think of is to mask a signal, something small. Intermittent. Yarik reached into the panel with a clamp and disconnected the bypass. The lights along the relay column flickered, then returned to normal. Vetriv turned to face him. "Should we notify security?" "No, not yet. Let's finish the job and go back quietly. You believe someone on board is committing unauthorized transmissions. I think someone didn't want this actuator working." They sealed the panel and started back down the walkway. Inside the station, Yarik filed the repair report without mentioning the bypass. He sent a separate encrypted note to the station systems officer, flagging the anomaly for investigation under routine maintenance irregularity protocols, nothing that would raise alarms publicly, but enough to get attention behind closed doors. Later that evening, Yarik returned to the botanical ring. His ribs ached not sharply, but enough to remind him he'd twisted too hard. He sat beneath the same biolume tree as before, watching the orange leaves sway under the recycled airflow. Vetriv joined him, not asking permission. "You concealed the sabotage from the official report." I flagged it quietly. "Why? Because if someone's hiding a signal, they're likely watching for reports. If we go loud, they disappear. You are not an investigator." "No." But I know how people act when they're cornered. Vetriv sat without speaking. The plants around them rustled gently. A Thanorian technician passed by, nodded once, and continued misting a row of fungus blooms. "You twisted your torso during the repair," Vetriv said. "I noticed. You will exacerbate the strain if you continue such movements. Then I'll be careful." "You are not careful." Yarik leaned back on the bench. "No, but I am deliberate," Vetriv tilted his head. "You are aware that your behavior pattern diverges from standard human norms." "I'm aware that I do what needs doing. You risk re-injury." "I'll heal." Vetriv paused. "Your body is not adapting anymore, it is resisting." Yarik flexed his fingers. "You really think I don't know that?" "I think you do, but you act as though you don't." They sat in silence again. The lights dimmed slightly for evening cycle. Somewhere above, the station hummed softly. "I've been studying something," Vetriv said at last. "Not just your scans. Historical accounts, records of human injury adaptation. Your culture has romanticized pain recovery, glorified it, as though suffering is a right." Yarik didn't answer. "I reviewed the original footage of your injury again," Vetriv continued. "You were 19, you stood, then collapsed again. But you tried. I remember." "Why?" Yarik looked up at the artificial stars on the ceiling. "Because I didn't want to be helped." "You think help is weakness?" "I think sometimes it makes you feel like you failed." Vetriv considered that. "That is not failure. That is survival." "I know that now." Vetriv stood. "Then stop punishing the part of you that kept going." Yarik stared at him. "You're not just cataloging data anymore." "I never was." He walked away, leaving Yarik with the rustling leaves and the quiet hum of airflow. The next morning, a message from Station Command confirmed that the unauthorized modification had been traced to a faulty diagnostic subroutine. No evidence of sabotage, no further action required. Yarik deleted the message. He returned to his routine. No dramatic injuries, no more symposiums. Just quiet, steady work. His scar still pulled when he twisted too far. He still favored his left side when tired, but he no longer tried to hide it. Vetriv stopped shadowing him after that week. A new assignment took him to another sector. No farewell. No ceremony. Just a note left on Yarik's console. Deviation acknowledged, function retained. Yarik folded it once and tucked it behind the old MedScan printout in his locker. The scar remained. So did the memory, but neither defined him. He adjusted, he endured, and as always, he kept moving.